many things about God that are hard to grasp. Out of nothing, He spoke everything into existence. One moment, there was nothing, and the next, bang, there was everything. He created time. So if you think about it, God is above and beyond time in the same way that a watchmaker is above and beyond the watch he has just handcrafted. God is so different from us, He chooses people, not based upon their goodness or their innate abilities, but according to His sovereign plan. He is the perfect, sinless Creator God who expects perfection and sinlessness, and yet He accepts into His presence imperfect and sinless people. We deserved to die, but God chose to die on our behalf to pay for our pardons. One of the hardest things about God to grasp is the limitlessness of God. Listen to this description of God written by an 8-year-old named Danny Dutton from Chula Vista, California. This is priceless. God's second most important job is listening to prayers. An awful lot of this goes on since some people, like preachers and things, pray at times beside bedtime. God doesn't have time to listen to the radio or television because of this. God sees everything and hears everything, which keeps Him pretty busy. So, you shouldn't go wasting His time by going over your mom and dad's head to ask Him for something they said you couldn't have. Jesus helps His dad out by listening to prayers and seeing things which are important for God to take care of and which ones He can take care of Himself without bothering God. Like a secretary, only more important. The limitlessness of God. We just can't seem to grasp it. Open your Bibles to John chapter 4. John chapter 4. Now, we learn every day that the universe is infinitely vast. We keep looking beyond where we looked before, and we have yet to find its farthest boundary. And yet we know that God is bigger than the universe because God is the one who set the boundaries of the universe from one end to the other. God is beyond all things, while you and I are stuck in the middle of just a few things. So it's difficult for us to grasp this limitlessness of God. It's easy to forget that Jesus is unlimited. Well, we're studying the signs that John chose to give us pictures of Jesus and by extension, pictures of God. In this second sign John chose to use to share with us, Jesus helped and healed, and in the process showed that He is unlimited. He is not limited by my location. He's not limited by my location. Let's look at the story starting at verse 46. Therefore, Jesus came again to Cana of Galilee, where He had made the water wine. And there was a royal official whose son was sick at Capernaum. When he heard that Jesus had come out of Judea into Galilee, he went to Him and was imploring Him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. Now we're going to hear that come down multiple times. Cana was in the hill country. Capernaum was on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, kind of down in a bit of a valley. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you people see signs and wonders, you simply will not believe." The royal official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son lives." Well, the man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and started off. And as he was now going down, his slaves met him, saying that his son was living. So he inquired of them the hour when he had begun to get better, and then they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him." So the father knew that it was at that hour in which Jesus said to him, "Your son lives," and he himself believed, and his whole household. This is, again, a second sign that Jesus performed when he had come out of Judea into Galilee. Now, the government official was in a panic, and justifiably so. His son was experiencing a raging fever. They did not have aspirin. They did not have ibuprofen. They had a hard time even getting ice to bring his fever down. So the official traveled from Capernaum on the coast of the Sea of Galilee to Cana in the hillsides, about a 2 days journey. One source I read said it could take you 2 days, day and night, traveling. Time was running out, so he basically said, "Jesus, hurry. We got to get down to Capernaum or my son is going to die." We are so limited by our location, by where we are. And people have always been limited by location. In the Old Testament, when the children of Israel were ripped from their ancestral homeland to exile in Babylon, they believed that they had left the God of their fathers back in the land of their fathers, in the ruins of Judah. This is why exile was such a horrific experience for people back then. People were ripped from their homeland, ripped from everything that gave them identity, their homeland and their gods, which they believed were attached to the land. And they were taken elsewhere without identity, without their gods, and thus they were assimilated into the cultures into which they were stuffed. God is not limited by our location, but I think this is cool thing about God. He is mindful of our limitations. If you've ever read Ezekiel's prophecy, the book opens with a technicolor picture of God, and God is depicted as coming to the children of Israel in exile in Babylon from the north. If you look, if you got good eyes, you can see Babylon is kind of over on the right-hand side. Jerusalem is down in the left-hand corner there on the Mediterranean Sea. Why was God coming to them from the north? Well, nobody crossed the desert. When they were drug off into exile, they didn't cross the desert. They went up what we call the Fertile Crescent, up north along the caravan routes, and then from the north down to Babylon. So God is depicted as coming from Judah, up the Fertile Crescent, north of the crescent, around the crest, and then south to the exiles of Babylon. God is not limited by our location, but He knows that we are. God didn't have to travel to Capernaum to heal that official's son, because He's not limited by location. When God called me to preach, my dream was to be the first Southern Baptist pastor without a Southern Baptist accent in Washington State. Most of the preachers were from Texas or Oklahoma, and some were even from Tennessee or Mississippi. They talked funny. Well, then God sent me to college in West Texas. When I graduated, I hurried back to the Evergreen State, to the Evergreen side of the state, the western part of Washington. And one day God knew in His infinite wisdom, picked me up and took me to the eastern side of the state, from the Evergreen State to the Ever-Brown side of the state. The eastern side of Washington is a desert, just like West Texas. Then I went to seminary in California. And now today, I'm a Southern Baptist pastor, hopefully without a Southern Baptist accent, in Tennessee. Everywhere I went, God was there. God was at work. God was doing His thing. I remember as a teenager, first we went on tour in Canada, and God was there. The following year, we went on a summer tour to Mexico, and God was there. Limited by our location, it's easy for us to think, if I can find the right place, the right church, the right city, the right state, then God will bless me, God will use me, God will be there. But God's power is not limited by our location. If we're not careful as American Christians, we can get this idea that God only works in the Bible Belt, or God only works in Tennessee, or God only works in America. Do you know where the fastest growing church in the world is today? America? None. Europe? South Korea? This is going to blow your mind. According to Caleb Park, the associate editor for FoxNews.com, the fastest growing church in the world is in Iran. Iran, the world's chief sponsor and exporter of radical Islamic terrorism. Park wrote of this church, it owns no property, no buildings, no central leadership, and is predominantly led by women. I just think that is so cool in a male-dominated Muslim country. In fact, they're saying that in Iran, Islam is dead, that nobody practices it. They give lip service to it only. One of the pastors explained that everything they do is built on prayer. She said, we find people of peace through prayer. But what she means by that is people who are open to the gospel in this Muslim-dominated country. We even find locations for their meetings through prayer. Jesus has come in their dreams, or He's come miraculously in their lives. When we hear this, she said, we know that Jesus has gone ahead of us. Jesus is unlimited. He is not limited by my location. He's also not limited by my understanding. He's not limited by my understanding. That government official had no real clue who Jesus was. All he knew for sure was that there were stories that he was something of a miracle worker. Apparently, he'd stirred up quite a dust storm at the Feast of the Jews that had just transpired in Jerusalem. Pilgrims from that feast had traveled back home to Galilee, and word reached the government official. Who was Jesus? Was he just a rabbi? Was he a faith healer? Was he a prophet? Could he do anything at all? He didn't know. In fact, Jesus said to him, unless you people see signs and wonders, you will not believe in me. He even ignorantly assumed Jesus had to travel 2 days to Capernaum to heal his son. Well, in spite of the man's understanding or lack thereof, Jesus said, go on home. Your son is well. Now, come on. Don't we say this? I don't know enough to serve the Lord. I don't know my Bible well enough to teach in children's church or to help in vacation Bible school or to teach a Sunday school class or lead a small group. Well, I've never worked on a team at my place of employment, so how in the world could I serve on a committee? We may be limited by our understanding, but the Bible makes it pretty clear. God is not. 2 stories that really illustrate that. One of them is one of my favorite oddball stories from the Old Testament. You know, God loves variety. He's always doing surprising things, and that's one of the things I love about studying the Old Testament. There are so many surprising things in the Old Testament. For example, this story about a prophet named Balaam, who, in spite of God's strict warnings to the contrary, was determined to go and curse the children of Israel for a local warlord through whose lands the people of Israel were passing. God said, don't you go. But the prophet was determined to go because this warlord was offering him a hefty reward for his troubles. Well, Balaam saddled his donkey and mounted his donkey and headed off to curse the children of Israel. But unbeknownst to him, there was an angel standing in his path with a wicked sword in his hand. Balaam was about to lose his head. Literally. Well, thankfully, the donkey could see the death angel. And so the donkey ignored the prophet's instruction and veered off the path. And enraged, the prophet struck him, pulled him back onto the path. Once again, the donkey veered off the path. And the prophet just kept getting madder and madder. This happened a total of 4 times. The prophet trying to steer the donkey going off the path, and finally God opened the mouth of the donkey, and he looked over his shoulder and he said, "What are you doing? I've been your faithful servant all these years. Why are you striking me?" And then God opened the eyes of the prophet, and he saw the angel and the sword, and he realized that the donkey had saved his life. Now, this gave rise to an expression I first heard in college. The next time you feel like you don't know enough to be used by God, you remember this saying. If God could use Balaam's ass, he can certainly use me. It's in the King James. Go look. Second story. Okay. Andy Stanley told about how at North Point Community Church, in their small group meetings that they have throughout the week, they involve unbelievers, even giving unbelievers the responsibility of leading the small group time. Well, in one of these small group meetings, there was a man named John who, at his first study, he said, "Look, I'm only here to make my wife happy. And whatever you do, don't you call upon me to pray." Well, as the weeks wore on and he came with his wife, the Lord began to soften John's heart. On the 8th week that he was there, Andy came up to him, leader materials in hand, and asked him to facilitate the next meeting. Andy wrote in his book, Deep and Wide, "He looked at me like I was crazy. Then he smiled and said, 'Sure, I'll lead,' like he was calling my bluff." Well, the following week, John showed up thoroughly prepared. But the moment that made the entire night unforgettable was when he said, "All right, the leader's guide says we are to open in prayer, and we're supposed to get on our knees. So let's all get on our knees, and I'll say the prayer." And he wrote, "There was not a dry eye in the group as John prayed his very first prayer out loud." Not many weeks later, John invited Jesus into his heart. Think about it. God used the donkey. God used an unbeliever. So God can use us, for he is not limited by our understanding. I guess what it all comes down to is, what size God do we have? Chuck Swindoll told about a rather well-known preacher, at least well-known in preacherly circles, who 12 years after graduating from Princeton Theological Seminary was invited to come back and preach at a chapel service. After the service, the preacher's former Hebrew professor came up to speak to him. They shook hands, and the professor said, "If you come back again, I will not come to hear you preach. I only come once. When my boys come back, I come to see if they are big Godders or little Godders." The preacher asked the professor to explain what he meant. The professor said, "Well, some men have a little God, and they are always in trouble with it. He can't do any miracles. He can't take care of the inspiration and transmission of the Scriptures to us. He doesn't intervene on behalf of his people. They have a little God, and I call them little Godders. Then there are those who have a great God. He speaks, and it is done. He commands, and it stands fast. He knows how to show himself strong on behalf of them that fear him." And then he said to that preacher, "You have a great God. You're a big God." Are we little Godders who have a limited God because, well, we're so limited and, well, God must be like us? Or are we big Godders? Do we have a God who holds the stars? Do we have a God who can do something as amazing as making a speechless donkey speak? Do we understand that Jesus is limitless? You see, in life, in service, and in trials, it is not the size of my faith that matters. It is the size of the one in whom I have faith that matters. I hope we have a big God, for God is unlimited. Let's pray. Lord, you really can do anything you choose to do. The fact that you, an absolutely, eternally perfect, sinless being who demands perfection and sinlessness, can love and accept those of us who are not, is just so amazing. Hard to believe. Sometimes we feel like because people have to earn our acceptance, we have to earn yours. It's hard for us to remember that we choose leaders based upon what we see in their lives. You choose leaders based upon your plan for their lives. Over the years, people have questioned the many miracles recorded in your word. The assumption is, well, we can't do that, so God couldn't do it. That doesn't happen according to our understanding of natural law, so it's a myth. God doesn't really do that kind of thing. Lord, help us to trust you and to follow you. Wherever you send us, whatever you ask us to do. For God, it may be too big for us, but it's not too big for you. Thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen. Our limitless God is in charge. He reigns. His reign is often hidden in the world. We don't always see it. The world certainly doesn't see it. But one day, his reign will be supreme. Every knee will bow. Every tongue will confess that our limitless God, He is Lord. We look forward to that day. But today, in the midst of it all, my invitation is simple. Whatever God has asked you to do, especially if it's more than you can do, do it. And trust Him to help you do it. Because though we are limited, He is limitless and gives us His power to do more than we can do. Let's stand together and let's look forward to the day when He reigns.
It's the song of the redeemed, rising from the African plain. It's the song of the forgiven, drowning out the Amazon rain. The song of ancient believers, filled with God's holy fire. It's every tribe
Lord our God, you are all powerful, Father. Father, no matter how high we go in the peaks or how low we go in the depths, Father, we cannot hide from you. And Father, your love and grace will never leave us, no matter where we go. Father, you see our love for our fellow man. Father, you see our hate for our fellow man. And Father, we pray that we would go unto you to please you in how we treat our fellow people. Father, as we pass the plates, Father, this is a gift unto you. This is a gift unto your people. And Father, we ask you to bless them in your holy name.